Good morning. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Africa Tech Week Cyber Tech Masterclass. So I'm joined by our guests here from Austria. He's moved from Germany, Hans. And we got two of our other guests from Joburg, Nikki and Mark. So let me get straight into the presentation and get it up for you. So we're really here to learn about how the UN and Austria Bank are saving about 80% on their database administration, a little bit more than that. So we've got some key learnings. Where are we now? Why is that stopping?
That's fine.
There, okay. No.
Okay.
There you go. So my name is Ralph Fletcher. I'm the CEO of Topco. So we just had some technical issues and we're doing Africa Tech Week in October later this year. I'll go through that as well. So the agenda points is really just a quick intro from myself about Africa Tech Week and Topco, why we're doing these webinars, a quick introduction to our panelists and speakers. Hans-Jürgen Schnurrig he's a CEO of Cybertech. Mark Badham is the MD of Leading Edge Learning in Johannesburg. And Nikki Stapelberg is the head of Africa Business at Axiom SL. So we're going to be launching a couple of polls, trying to find out where you guys are coming from. I'm in Cape Town with our administrator, Kyle. So let us know in the chat where you're coming from. And if you've got any questions, put it in the Q&A. If you want to chat and learn a little bit about what we're talking about, also put it in the Q&A. So let me just quickly tell you about Topco. Topco researches about 10,000 companies annually. We've got about 100 points of data. And really, we're trying to create a trusted network of top companies, startup, policymakers, academia, and really the ecosystem to make business happen. So these are some of the things that we do, the projects, things like the top 500 companies, top women in business and government, top empowerment, and Vision 2030. Africa Tech Week's built on a purpose of really understanding how Africa can transform the world. So getting into the technology side of things from an African perspective. So what are the technologies? What are the big companies doing? What are the governments doing? And really trying to help solve some of our big problems that we have in Africa. Africa Tech Week was obviously launched last year and was mentioned as one of the top tech events in Africa for startups for 2020. What we're seeing in terms of digital transformation, and I think one of the reasons we're doing this, is we're seeing a big impact in terms of connectivity, the culture of innovation. Data is a new commodity. Customer experience is really important, obviously security. And I think, as you'll find out, Hans is an expert in all of these areas. So really just a quick overview, what we're seeing from CIOs in our polls and our studies is that connectivity and security are really important right now. I think what we're also seeing from some of the feedback is that best practice around customer-centric companies is really high. And it's not just about legal requirements, but reputational management is more important now from trusted companies with secure information. So let me just open up quickly and formally introduce our speakers. Hans-Jürgen Schnurrig, he's the CEO at Cybertech. Last week we spoke about the top 5 trends, or last time we spoke about the top 5 trends in Africa in terms of data and databases. I'm also joined by Mark Badham. Mark is the MD of Leading Edge, and he's doing a lot of training and training centers for organizations, big corporates, and the fast-moving sort of tech organizations in Africa. And then we have Nikki Stapelberg, who's the head of Africa Business. He's a consultant who's really, going throughout Africa, talking to the organizations. He's from an organization from Axiom. And so really Mark and Nikki have been brought on board. And maybe we can just, go into a couple of the things that we'll be doing. It would be the polls, some key learnings. So, and one of the things that we sort of talked about last time was the impact of Postgres. But bringing on Mark and Nikki, I think it gave us a good opportunity just to really unpack. Hans has a great product We know he services organizations like the UN, BMW. But guys, can I ask, why is it that you've jumped in and sort of partnering with Hans in Africa? Why did you see the benefits for organizations and for you guys to get involved? Can I pass it over to you?
Sure. Would you like to start, Nick?
Yeah, I think for me, it's very exciting to have a company like Cybertech entering the local market, offering a very, very competitive and solid, stable product offering in this market. I think our market has been dominated for a very long time with all the big players. And with that, you get certain constraints. All the models are pretty standard, pretty the same. You don't get that flexibility from customers and organizations. Support is not always optimal. And it's very exciting to get this kind of a open source technology, but then licensed as a packaged product and offer that to the market. And I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, similarly, we've been involved in the open source market also for, plus minus 20 years. And open source is very empowering and it's a great opportunity for Africa, I think, to engage with technology in a way that commercial doesn't allow. But big enterprise providers need to have someone who can back them up, someone who can give them the same assurance that they're used to getting from the commercial provider. And we've seen in the Linux market, Red Hat has done that very effectively for Linux. And we have players in the PostgreSQL market like Cybertech, and there are a couple of others, but Cybertech, the first one to really want to invest in Africa and to want to really make a difference here. And we're very excited to be a part of that. We want to be able to offer training that has credibility on the international market for our customers in South Africa, and also just to be able to bring Postgres to a broader market. So yeah, so that's very exciting for us.
Rolf, you're muted.
You're right, I am. I was saying, Hans, could you read my lips there? So Hans, you obviously got 20 years of experience doing what you're doing, and I think you've got some great organizations that you're working with. So, I mean, if maybe you want to start us off with your presentation.
Sure. So let me find my presentation. Where is that? So start. Here we are. So can everybody see my screen?
Not yet.
So full screen. Here we are. So good morning, everybody. So thank you for showing up. As Rolf already mentioned, my name is Hans-Jürgen Schönig. I'm the CEO of Cybertech. And the topic of today is how you can successfully move from commercial database offerings to Postgres, and why you should do that in the first place, right? So let's get started. Let's try to make this very interactive presentation, and let's take it from there.
Can
you see my screen?
No, not yet.
Oh, I should have shared it already. Hold on.
I think there's a button that says just share, and then it will. There we go. Hans, you're on mute as well. It says tag team mute.
Okay, works. So can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Excellent. So short introduction about the company, what we're doing. We're basically a database company. So we're doing data science related services and especially Postgres related services which includes 24/7 database support, which includes training, consultancy, performance tuning, etc. On the AI and machine learning side, we do mostly big data analysis, business intelligence, data mining, artificial intelligence, and so on. So basically what we provide is the full supply chain for data. That's what we've been doing for 20 years. So we're a fairly international team. We got offices in Switzerland, Poland, Estonia, Austria, Uruguay, South Africa, and Mauritius. And yeah, as you've mentioned already, there are a couple of important customers. Some of them you might know, like Amazon, HP, BMW, Audi, and so on and so on. Basically, we're in all industries, so it's not something that is just associated with one branch of the economy. So it's really a wide thing. So there are a couple more. So the first question, which is naturally arising, is why would anybody want to go Postgres? And there's a fairly important website out there. It's called DB Engines. And it basically lists the database engines out there and how popular they are. And I've taken this data from, I believe, last week about Postgres popularity. And what we see here is that Postgres is really a rising star. So we're not talking about the niche market or some special proprietary small thing. Postgres has been around for many, many years. It's constantly developed. It's constantly growing. And according to data from Amazon, it's the fastest growing service on their platform. So Postgres is here to stay. It's not something that was recently invented, which is just a test product. So it's really one of the rising stars in the database market. And as you can see, we're currently number 4. And if you're looking at the trend, for example, of SQL Server or some others, you will see that the Postgres is either catching up or is simply taking over. So this is really something which is going to bring the future to the main computing centers, right? So yes,
that's a very interesting graph, but you know, from a ranking perspective. But if you have to dissect the question, but why would companies consider moving to Postgres? Let's unpack that a bit.
Well, if you look at the first, let's say, 3 options, which are in my graph, Oracle, MySQL, and SQL Server. Oracle and MySQL are basically the same company, and then is SQL Server. Those are the commercial guys. So those are the guys which are going to charge you heavily on licensing. And the same is true for DB2 and some others, right? So it's really about the technology of being on the forefront of development, first thing. And second thing is the free on top are really, you know, what we consider to be the old money, you know. So those are, you know, the huge, big legacy systems from our point of view. And that's one of the reasons why you should seriously consider to move there, or consider moving there. Because it's as I said, according to Amazon, it's the fastest growing product on their platform. So it really does have an impact. It's more flexible, and I'm going to show you how you can benefit from that. Does that answer your question? Kind of.
Yes, I think the next few slides will unpack that in more details.
I hope so. I hope it does. So feel free to ask me anytime if there's anything we can add to this scenario. But I think the trend is pretty clear. It shows that it's moving up. It's doing so in ever increasing speeds, and I consider that to be a good thing. So, moving core databases, there are really a couple of arguments why somebody would do that, and those are, from my point of view, the key arguments which we should try to focus on. The first argument, which is often brought up, is cost cutting. Second argument, which I would like to elaborate on, is technical independence. Third argument is about human resources. Fourth argument is about the general topic of flexibility. And then we are already in data protection, protecting your investments, And then we're talking about incomplete information, documentation, skills, etc. So those are the key things. And let me get started with the first topic first, which is cost cutting. So when we're talking about cost cutting, we're really looking at from my point of view, 4 key aspects. First of all, it's the most obvious problem. People are pretty aware of that. It's a pricing issue, and it's a matter of capital allocation, right? Because you can only spend every rand once. The question is, how do you spend it wisely? What's going to give you the biggest bang for the buck? Or you can even make a profit. I mean, if you save on costs, you can increase your profits or cut your losses, or whatever you want to see it, right? So the first argument, but by far not the only one, is the cost-cutting argument. So let's dig into that. This is Larry's parking garage. Let's call it Larry's garage, whatever the name is going to be like. And it says, we had to charge you 5 million for every parking space because you could have used the whole garage, right? So it's about basically having the feeling of being ripped off by commercial people. And costs are important. It's not only a Corona thing. So if you have, let's say, 1 million rand or 10 million rands or 100 million rands, what do you prefer? Paying it to somebody who's going to give you a license, or do you want to keep it as a profit, right? And especially in times of Corona, it's not only about increasing your profit, it's also about securing your business. Because if you waste your money on something that is just virtual, it might not be good for your business. I mean, if you purchase a ton of coal, if you purchase 1,000 liters of oil, if you purchase an office building, you get a real asset. But what's the real asset of a license? It's a virtual thing. You can't eat it. You can't sell it on. You cannot do anything with it, but just run something, right? So it's really a drag on your business, right? So cost is important. And when we talk about cost cutting here, those are pretty real numbers. We've seen that everywhere. So open source does not mean that you can run a huge deployment with 1,000 servers for free. You're still going to pay for labor. You're still going to pay for hardware. You're still going to have some support agreement, etc. But if we look at the overall picture of this whole thing, what we saw in the field is that we're usually talking about 80% cost saving. Technically, when we evaluate those clients, we're rather on the 90% side, but I consider that to be too aggressive, and nobody would believe it anyway. But we're talking about at least 80%, because if you burn $1 million on licensing, I mean, imagine how much labor you can purchase for this kind of money just to be on even terms, right? So for being conservative, the calculation we brought up is 80%, but in reality, we've seen cases where it's actually a lot more, right? So that's the realistic cost comparison on the database side.
So Hans, if I can ask.
Yeah, sure.
So often when we're looking at cost cutting, there's a cost for moving to this new system in terms of training and in terms of moving the system across. How much is that affected? Does that cost of 20% including those costs of transfer?
It's actually included. If we're talking about the 5-year period, usually the first year is at least a win. So the first year is usually at least a win, and the full benefit kicks in as long as if you run the thing longer and longer. So basically, cost-wise, we've not seen a single case where it ever turned out to be a loss, right? That's a bold statement, because the reason is, if somebody charges you, say, 20,000 euros for each core, right? And we're talking about 8 core machines, 16 core machines, 30 core machines. If the license cost is 20,000 euros per core, I mean, do the math. I mean, any kind of migration cost is usually always justified. And if we're talking about a 5-year period, I mean, I cannot imagine a scenario where you don't win. I mean, it's totally inconceivable that if you're purchasing Oracle, if you're purchasing some enterprise edition from some commercial vendor, that it ever turns out to be a loss. It's inconceivable in my judgment. We've never seen that. I mean, some big corporations might not see the huge gains because they're lost in bureaucracy. But in this case, it's the bureaucracy that's a drag on their business, which would have been the case in commercial world anyway, right? So if we're talking about pure database operations, that's what it is. It's that simple. So, but let's move a bit forward and focusing on the cost thing. That's the easy argument, right? That's easy argument. It's going to be cheaper. If you want to save on costs, that's a straight hand. But if you're running a database business, or if you're running any kind of business, you really don't want to be reactive. You want to be on the top of the food chain. You want to be the guy who's controlling the trends. You want to be the guy at the forefront of development. So technical independence really does have value. So imagine you're Google, right? And you want to build a search engine based on some commercial out-of-the-shelf database, right? And you're downloading the internet into a standard commercial database, running something out of the box, sold to you by one of the big vendors, right? Let's call them NBI to make it simple. Do you really think that Google would ever have gotten off the ground if they wouldn't have gone for technical independence in the first place? You think that Facebook would have gone off the ground if they had a commercial salesman in their backyard selling them standard enterprise edition of whatever commercial database? I think they wouldn't have gone anywhere. So technical independence is an asset. If you look at the graph here, which says the amount of data around in the world, you will see that first of all, it's an exponential curve, which means that it's growing and growing and growing and growing. So if you're stuck with a license model from the 80s, where do you expect to get with a license model from the 80s? So technical independence does have value, and technical independence comes with a couple of issues, right? It means, what if the license policy changes? Imagine you're running Google and you've licensed a commercial product and you've built your whole business on this product. And then your vendor says, hey guys, next year it's 5 times more expensive because you cannot get rid of our product anyway. How do you run the large corporation that way? You wouldn't do that, right? Secondly is, suppose you have thousands of devices in the field. And that's easy to do. I mean, just imagine you are running point of sale stations, you're running a supermarket chain, you're running gas stations, you're running weather sensors, you're running whatever. What happens if you have 50,000 devices in the field and then the sales guy comes in and says, let's do a license negotiation? If I have 50,000 hardware pieces spread all over the world, do you really think it's a negotiation? I got you by the balls completely, no discussion, right? That's not a negotiation. That's a fake negotiation. I'm going to tell you the price and that's it, right? That's not a negotiation. So that's ransom, yes.
I mean, I don't know if Nikki agrees with this or not, but it seems that there's, certainly in Africa, there seems to be a sense that, you know, the good old saying that you'll never get fired for buying IBM. Nikki, are you seeing that solutions like this have got old ways of thinking that need to be disrupted? Are you seeing buyers being caught up in, held up to these big ransoms, essentially, of costings? And, you know, how do you as a CIO get around this when the board doesn't maybe have the level of information?
Absolutely. I think most companies dealing with big, let's call them older software architecture, or not necessarily older, but older models, are caught up in that whole model with what Hans just described. So Hans, I would be very curious to know, how does the Postgres license model through Cybertech differ these other organizations in the market that have us by the short and good?
First of all, first of all, Postgres is open source, right? So there is no such thing as a license cost. What we do charge for is support if you want the service, right? So if you're running, let's say, 10,000 servers, what you do want is an insurance policy. And there are vendors out there who are going to provide you with this service. So there is no vendor lock, there's no license cost. And as far as training is concerned, we offer this kind of training. We train people, we help you, but we're not running a monopoly on this thing. So we strongly believe that people should take our service because we're the best guys on the block. We don't believe in selling our service because they have to, right? So I believe that freedom of choice is going to improve the quality of the product. And ultimately, it's also good for the vendor, not just for the customer. So if our customers keep us awake, which means they challenge us, there's competition in the market, it inevitably leads to a better product, which inevitably leads to the fact that we're going to be stronger in the market. It absolutely means that the product is going to improve, which is going to sustain the product in the long run, right? If you want to make a profit for half a year, for 1 year, lock your customers. If you want to make a profit for 20 years, make sure that you're the best guy on the block, right? And we want to be the best guy on the block for the next 20, 30 years, right? I think that's the difference in thinking. Do you think from one quarter to the next? That's license revenue, right? If you're thinking in 20 years, right? So if that's your span of thinking, is it 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, then you have to make a superb product, which means sometimes having the profit in 5 years in mind and not a short-term thing. So what it means is we provide the whole service chain for Postgres, but we're well aware that there is competition in the market, and our aim is just to keep improving to make sure that we stay the winners, right?
Makes a lot of sense.
Okay, so learning a lot faster. So let's suppose you're running 50,000 systems or 5 systems or 500 systems, whatever number. At some point, you're going to need somebody. It's not, you can put it there, but you have to run applications, you have to develop applications, you have to put it there. Eventually, it's about people, right? Eventually, you need somebody who knows stuff. No matter if you're moving to the cloud or if you stay on-prem, whatever. At some point, somebody has to know something about the thing. So you have to hire somebody. So you have to go to the labor market and say, okay, guys, we need Postgres consultants, we need whatever. So the question is, how do you find those people? Of course, you can purchase them, one thing. But if you want somebody like application developers, you somehow need them. The question is, if you can find them, it's fine. The question is, where do they come from? So they're not breeded like chicken. And the third thing is, what happens if you want to train them internally, right? So that's an argument. And the argument is, suppose, let's just have an experiment of thought. You want to hire somebody, wants to know something about SAP R3, or you want to hire somebody who is experienced in building nuclear bombs, right? Those people cannot learn those skills in their backyards, in their living room upstairs, where they live with their moms. You cannot build a nuclear reactor, an SAP system, a whatever nuclear reactor, a steam turbine. You cannot learn that just by being motivated, right? What you can do is you can install Postgres, you can install Linux, you can install Apache, you can teach yourself JavaScript. So the more open this technology is, the more likely it is that you find somebody who is self-educated. Self-educated means superb motivation, superb skill, no cost, nothing. It's just the best guy you can find. If somebody's self-educated, that's the guy you're looking for. That's a lot harder to do with a closed source, closed system. You just cannot build yourself a Siemens steam turbine to teach yourself about how a gas power plant works. You can't do that. It's impossible. So it's a lot harder to find those people. You have to put a lot of effort into educating them. That's a lot easier with open source. So that's one of the key arguments. Once you have achieved freedom from licensing, technical independence, you also have the freedom to learn, right? You can dig into the stuff. You can find information. You can become an expert. You just have to sit on your back and just do it, right? There's a chance of doing that. That's super important in my judgment.
So Hans, I mean, maybe Mark, you wanted to dive in here a little bit, but with South Africa, certainly in Africa, looking at skills, I'd imagine there's a lot of barriers to entry to learning the other systems because of the high costs, where with this, it offers that opportunity to a lot more people. Would that be the case, Mark?
Well, absolutely. Commercial training on commercial databases typically is expensive, but a bigger factor I think that we need to solve here, and it's one of the reasons why we're so keen on what Cybertech has to offer, is that companies still want to know that before someone touches their PostgreSQL database, that they actually know a thing or two about PostgreSQL, and that somebody external has actually verified this. And I'd like Hans maybe to talk a little bit about that as well, that we just, that they can do that as for customers and provide that kind of assurance so you've got all these guys that are self-trained, but you also just want to make sure that where there are gaps, they've been closed and that they've achieved some kind of a standard. Have you found that with your customers, Hans?
Oh, absolutely. And the thing is, you mentioned something very important, which was filling the gaps. There's a difference between filling the gap, certifying the guy, making sure that he's okay, than not being able to learn at all because you cannot set up a gas turbine in your backyard, even if you're highly motivated. So it's absolutely what you're saying. So it's more likely to have somebody that needs filling the gaps, which means we can bring him to a much higher level than if you just put him in front of something he had never chance to learn at all, right?
Yes.
So it's absolutely what you're saying. People are asking for this kind of stuff, and with our partners, that's exactly what we provide. We bring people up to speed and give them the highest education possible, which is higher because you have the chance to do that, because the knowledge is there, and you're usually building on a higher level, right? So they already know more usually when they come, right?
Right, and they're more passionate about it as well because they're invested in that technology. There's a sense of ownership, I think, in the open source community.
Absolutely. Just suppose I would put you into a course how to build a gearbox. I mean, what do you expect to happen? That's most likely. I assume that you're not especially interested in the internals of a gearbox, right? So the thing about passion is I wouldn't underestimate that. The passion thing is what brought people to the moon, right? And some funding from Uncle Sam, but let's leave that aside. Okay, so preventing trouble, lack of information. Suppose you're running a commercial database and you want to know, how does the database optimizer come up with this kind of decision? And you're looking into the shiny red and blue and pink marketing paper and it says, best optimizer in the world, and you're stuck with a problem, right? How do you know what the bloody thing is doing? It's not disclosed. It's intellectual property, You're not supposed to know what the thing is doing. With open source, you can pay somebody to figure out, already, or you can Google for that, or you can ask your support company or whatever. But at least you have the right to know. You can look it up. You can take the thing, take a look at it, reverse engineer it, and then That might look obscure to most people, but we had a case with Vodafone some years ago where some optimizer thing just took way too long. It couldn't be handled, right? And we just looked at the source code, identified the problem, changed it, and the trouble was gone in 2 days. Imagine that with a commercial database. You file a ticket to one of the big vendors saying that there is something wrong in your optimizer. Guess what's going to happen? Nothing, right? I can assure you that nothing is going to happen because we've seen it all over again, right? So the pure availability of information, the ability to reverse engineer, it doesn't mean that they are doing that on a daily basis, but if shit is really boiling over, if things are really, really critical, that's when it counts. For a 5 megabyte database storing your, you know, your menu in your cantina, it doesn't matter. But if we're talking about this example I've mentioned with Vodafone, we're talking about 200 terabytes of data. If something goes wrong with 200 terabytes of data in 24/7 operations, having the chance to figure out what is going on inside the engine, that's an asset. It has more value than the trouble ticket that ends up in India, you know, with somebody who has no bloody idea of what you're doing, right? So I consider that to be a real asset. So next thing is what I would call flexibility. So we got pricing, we got technical independence, we got availability of labor, we got availability of information. And the next thing is flexibility. If you're building a large business, so if you want to become the next Google, the next Facebook, or simply the next biggest guy selling screws, you know, or selling spare parts for anything, it can be any kind of technology. I'm just bringing this Google example because it's way more obvious, right? It's easier to grasp. But it could be anything. It could be tractors. It could be anything, right? You need flexibility. If something is static, it means zero innovation, nothing is moving forward, you're stuck, right? So I had a customer a couple of years ago, and he wanted to know the price of 4 Informix licenses. Took me a day to not figure out, right? So imagine you're investing a day, imagine you're taking your best expert and you let him spend a day on figuring out the price. And nobody wants to tell you because let's negotiate, let's figure out, let's do whatever. We have to investigate. That's our price list. Sales is gonna contact you. I mean, if you just take the time you wasted on figuring out the bloody price, you could have already built a whole solution, you know what I mean? In some cases. How dare you? What's the point of that? I mean, it's pure overhead. And overhead kills business. It's that simple. And the same is, when we're talking about flexibility, we're talking about two things. First of all, you want to maintain flexibility. And the second thing is, you want to assure that this thing is going to be around in 10 years. Right? So if you want to deploy thousands of those things, because you're flexible, the other side of the coin is, or the other side of the equation is that you also want to assure that the damn thing is going to stay around, right? If you buy yourself a gasoline-powered car, you do that on the assumption that gasoline is going to be readily available next year, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't buy the damn thing, right? So flexibility matters. So if you want to install 10,000 database systems with Postgres tomorrow, or if you want to install 10,000 web servers tomorrow accessing this Postgres database, you can just go and do it. No strings attached. We can sit together in 10 minutes and deploy 10,000 pieces. It's that simple. No discussion with anybody. No strings attached, like license model doesn't provide us with that, whatever. We can just go and do it. We can come up with a price for support, easy, and you can go and deploy 10,000 systems next moment. No strings attached. That's it. It's that simple, right?
So
and
Hans,
it does make a difference.
Hans, I mean, just bringing in Nikki here quickly. I mean, listening to what you're saying, it makes logical sense to move with Postgres and to work with you. Nikki, what are you seeing as some of the objections that maybe Hans has overcome that is stopping people from moving this way?
So I see this flexibility aspect that Hans just described as one of the big disruptors, because your response time to basically plan for the long term, but still maintain the ability to implement in the short term, for me makes a huge difference. Hans, just a question. You've elaborated now on, for example, how long does it get to get a price for 10,000 servers? You know, how responsive are you in that aspect? Just talk us through a practical example that you've seen in your years working with Postgres, where this flexibility was able to respond quickly if an enterprise starts growing exponentially, let's say year 5 to 7, in that range.
So basically, from our side, we need basically 1 business day to give you any kind of offer, right? This, of course, excludes some public bids where there's a lot of paperwork, right? So you have to fill some forms and stuff like that. But basically, if it's only about the price, you know, we've always been able to deliver something within 1 business day. And even if we don't, it still doesn't stop you from getting started with deployment while you get the price, right? So my offer does not hamper your ability to deploy anything, right? So it has been a major issue because sometimes, you know, people need 10 years or various years to sell a service. But once they got the signature from some big corporation, usually they have to move very fast, right? And even if you're in this long procurement process, you still need some pricing at hand, you know what I mean? So it does have an impact. If you are participating in a public bid and you're supposed to deliver your offer in 2 weeks, a whole bureaucracy, you cannot put all the calculations on top of the assumption what 500 commercial database license might cost you, right? You can't do that. It's impossible. So it does have a real impact in the real world, if that answers the question.
May I interject here as well? As I've also seen from some of our customers in the past that they find licensing to be a pain just from a management point of view, you know, keeping track of how many licenses they actually have and who's supposed to be using them and for what. Not only is it a pain to manage that, but it presents a risk. So even though they've intended to be compliant, sometimes they find themselves unwittingly not compliant. And then next thing, the Business Software Alliance arrives on their door and says, we want to audit you, and subjects them to this whole long and painful process in terms of being audited. And then they get fined when in fact they had every intention of paying the license.
Absolutely. I mean, we had cases, there are dedicated licensing experts whose only job is to make sure that this happens less frequently. Keep in mind, I did not say that it does not happen at all. I explicitly said that it happens less frequently, because that's exactly what you pointed out. They have best intentions, but it still doesn't work out because some practitioner or some guy doing an internship accidentally, you know, clicked some button he was not supposed to click. You know, we've seen that. There was a case for a German government department. They were running data for schools, you know, how many people, in which classes, how many teachers, who is on vacation. So really small thing. And they ran a benchmark just to see if this commercial database works. And they exceeded their license for 12 seconds. Some big company out of the blue, you know, this out of the blue company, just fined them €250,000. I said euros, not rand, for exceeding a commercial database license for slightly more than 10 seconds. I mean, I would have beaten the guy out of the building. You know what I mean? You know what it is. But it was €250,000 for 12 seconds, just for a benchmark. I mean, everything said, it's like you're driving a car, and if you put in 6th gear, we're going to beat you up on the next crossing, right? That's what it is. So does it answer your question? I hope it does.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
So let's move on. Protecting investment. So let's suppose you made the decision to go with Postgres or open source in general. First thing is you invested a whole lot of money, and you want to make sure that it's investment and not waste. We all want to invest money. Investment is ideally profitable. Waste is always waste. Waste doesn't turn into a profit. It rarely does. So first thing I want to point out is that Postgres cannot be bought up. How can you buy up Postgres? How would you do it? There is no owner per se. The rights are granted to University of Berkeley, so it's not something you can purchase. There's no such thing as an owner, right? Very important. Second thing is Postgres cannot be phased out. There's nobody who could potentially say, okay, let's next thing is not Postgres, it's post X whatever. Can't happen, right? So if this thing is running, it's going to keep running forever. Support from our side at least is infinite. And if you cannot just stop the product from existing in the first place, I mean, that's already a huge benefit, right? Because it's going to protect your investment big time, because nobody can close down your product. I mean, maybe some people are going to leave the community or whatever, but you cannot close down the product per se. You can still find or pay somebody, you know, to just keep this thing running for 50 years potentially. But I was saying 50 years, the US Navy put out a support contract for Windows for one of the aircraft carriers, and the duration was 50 years.
Sure.
The lifespan of an aircraft carrier is 50 years. The lifespan of a life insurance can be 100 years, right? So long term does make a difference. You don't build a tunnel and its surveillance systems for a quarter. You build it for eternity, right? So it does make a difference if a product just vaporizes or is phased out or whatever. So from our side, we support all the versions, support is infinite, and that's it, right? So, yes,
Great.
sorry.
Just talking about protecting the investment, and you know, somebody wanting to go to the expense of, let's say, moving to a new database like PostgreSQL. Obviously, one of their concerns will be, can it provide them exactly what they were getting from the previous database? I'm sure you get some people that the salesman from the commercial database convinces them that the commercial database has certain features that they're not actually going to get from PostgreSQL. Do you find that to typically be a problem?
Usually it is not, and but there is also a real-world approach to that. Let me be more precise. First of all, Postgres has been very feature complete for a long time already. It's steadily adding features, etc. So it's very feature complete. Let's suppose somebody comes in and says, "What? We need this kind of feature," right? It's open source. It means that you can still pay somebody to do it. I give you a classical case. We recently put out Postgres TDE, short for Transparent Data Encryption. So somebody, so to be precise, it was BMW, said, okay, we want our databases to be encrypted on disk. We need that for whatever reason, we need encrypted databases. So for the price of less than a big server's Oracle license, we implemented this feature and put it open source. So if it's a small feature that is missing, it's reasonably cheap to add. If it's a big feature and you're a big corporation, it still usually makes sense to just implement the feature rather than to license it. To repeat my point, implementing data encryption in Postgres was cheaper than licensing a single commercial server, right? Sure. But they're not running one server with encryption, they're running hundreds of servers with encryption. So even if something is missing, it's not a God-given thing. You can still change that, right? You know what I mean?
Yes.
There's no guarantee that the community is going to accept the change, of course. But if you need something, and we've done that countless times, that we just fixed stuff that was missing or which was suboptimal or hard to understand, this could be something as simple as a change to the documentation. If one of our support customers says, hey, I don't understand this little piece of documentation here. What does it mean? I have two choices. I can respond to his question, or I can respond to his question and fix the documentation, right? So we're going to fix the documentation because it helps us to not get the second request from the next guy asking the same thing, right? So we fix the documentation if you don't understand it. I mean, it can be as simple as that.
Yeah, absolutely. Open source software is also almost always documented far better than any closed system.
Yeah, I mean, last week I was trying to write a blog post on composite data types in Postgres, and I figured some dependency issue with unique indexing or blah, 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 right? And we fixed the bug. That's simple, right?
Wonderful.
Takes ages in commercial software development, right? Long-term support. So if you're running Postgres, I mean, as I said, what we try is to support it forever. We don't outphase versions because we were able to support some old version 10 years ago. What has changed? Nothing, right? We can still support it. It's not that we forgot everything about Postgres 9. That's not the case. You know, we were working with Postgres 9 for 10 years. So how can we miraculously forget, you know? So that's what I mean by supporting infinite. Postgres cannot be canceled. It's super important. And for Postgres support, as you can see, we got various options here. First of all, you can resell support if you want to use it for some other stuff. Imagine you're producing a Postgres-based product and you want to make sure that your customers are safe, right? So you can sell it on through the reseller network. And of course, we got all kinds of other services like remote DBA, kind of a dedicated DBA. We can help you set up your private cloud. We do the standard support hotline stuff. So you're covered, right? So.
Just sorry, quickly a question
yes.
about support.
Yes.
When you do third-tier support, and let's say you're dealing with a large company that either has existing DBAs or already has a contract with a company to provide them with DBAs, typically there's some sort of, if you're going to provide the third tier, you would require that those DBAs have passed your certification. Is that correct?
I would call it recommended, right? It makes sense to make sure that people know stuff, right?
Yeah.
So I would call it recommended rather than forced. I mean, it's a good thing. I mean, if you're running 10,000 servers, it certainly makes sense to send those people to you guys for training. I mean, there's no question about it. You know?
Yeah.
Hans, do you have a sense of how big the Postgres community is and the rate at which it's growing?
That's a very interesting question, which is asked quite frequently. The question is, how do you count them? I remember the previous Postgres version. I think I remember the question, the number that we had something like 250 contributors to one version. So it's 250 people sending in changes, etc. Of course, some people make it for a living. Some people just send in a fix for something. Some people might just, improve some documentation, right? But if I remember correctly, it was 250 people actually contributing code or fixes or changes to documentation. That does not include the whole ecosystem, you know, with people who are just doing advocacy, speaking at conferences, or just doing consultancy. I'm just talking purely about people contributing fixes or code or contributions on the code level, right? So that's the whole thing. That's 20 soccer teams, you know. That's a lot.
Yes.
Right? And that also implies that if you contribute a fix, it does not mean that there are not more people reviewing stuff. I mean, we also have to think about people who don't maybe not just contribute stuff, but who are able to read this code, which also means that they might give suggestions to those 250 people to change something. You know, you don't understand a feature, you dig into the code because you're some skilled DBA somewhere, and you got a bright idea, and you're talking to your buddy who might be able to contribute, and he's going to fix it for you, you know. So there are all kinds of contributions available. Okay, so let's move on to the next word, to the next thing. So let's how to proceed with migration. Currently, what we usually do is we make an assessment. So we just check your system, how much code do you have, whatever. We make an assessment, right? So we try to figure out, hold on. Sorry. So we do an assessment of the situation, then we help you to convert your stored procedures. We help to adapt your applications. We make sure that there's proper stuff, right? So comprehensive solutions. First of all, if you're moving from some of those commercial databases, you can expect some different behavior, like null handling, database specific stuff. Then you have to make sure that you can migrate without downtime. You have to make sure that you achieve at least as much security. And what is very important is also that we make sure that we handle quality management properly, right? So suppose you're a big bank, you got 5 million customers. Would you really give all your customer data to some obscure software development team, right, just to test your software after migration? Of course not. So obfuscation is an issue, that you're making sure that you're compliant with privacy laws. And then, of course, you won't give 5 million customers to your software developers because you're afraid that they're going to sell on your data, right? So obfuscation is something that is really important for migration, right? So we have a migration tool which allows you to especially migrate from Oracle to Postgres. And we did some internal testing the other day, and what we managed to do is it's not 500 gigabytes per second, it's 500 gigabytes per hour. So we can easily migrate something like a terabyte of data in an hour or something like that. Okay, so that's perfectly feasible.
Hans, you briefly touched on it on the previous slide, but just elaborate a bit. I think the stored procedures and the extent to which these databases are heavy with regards to stored procedures. How do you treat them? Is it possible to expand a bit on that?
Yes, for stored procedures, actually, that's usually the most labor-intense thing for whole migration. Data and data structure is usually the easier thing, right? There are two main challenges for migration. First of all is zero downtime, and second is procedures. For both things, there are solutions which allows you, procedures can be, 80% can be rewritten, right? So that you don't have to rewrite them by hand. 80% can be rewritten automatically. There are solutions in our migrator which can do that. And as for zero downtime migration, there is a mechanism in many commercial databases, especially in Oracle. It's called data capture, change capture. It's going through this Oracle, how do you call it, transaction log. And you can decode it and basically have close to zero downtime migration. That's feasible. And as I said, for stored procedures, there are built-ins into the migrator which can basically transcode, say, 80% of the code. The remaining 20%, I mean, could be 70 or 5 or 90%, depends on how you structured your application. But usually we can rewrite, say, 80%. In this case, this can be done automatically. And for the rest, you just have to get rid of vendor-specific stuff. Like, let's say you're using the old Oracle connect by syntax, which is off standard. Nobody knows that. Things like that. No other database engine has ever tried to do it that way. This needs some manual adaptation. But I would say 80% is feasible. Right? So, okay, so automatic migration, zero downtime. So I can highly recommend you this Oracle Migrator we did for you. We call it CyberTech Migrator. It's a quite comprehensive solution to migrate your database with as little downtime as possible. if you're interested, I would highly encourage you to get in touch with our folks for a live demo, right? And yeah, that's pretty much it from our side. So what we can offer as a company is, first of all, we're helping with migration. We have the tool chain for migration to make it super painless, super easy, super feasible. We got all the skills to do, 24/7 support, remote administration, performance tuning, training, etc. So that's what we offer. We've been in professional Postgres for more than 20 years, so we know stuff. We've done Postgres for 20 years, nothing else. That's it. Postgres and data science for 20 years. And yeah, of course, you're welcome to ask questions. And if there's anything you want to know, just go ahead. Key learnings. Migration pays off. You can count on long-term support. We can provide you with skills and labor. And of course, there's 24/7 support available. And again, migration does pay off. So having said that, let's pass on to Ralph and Mark. And from my side, thank you for your attention. Thank you for showing up. And let's open the questions.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Hans. It's I got messages last time. You're a living legend, guru. So
thank you, which means I'm dead soon, or what?
Well, I think it shows as well. I think your attitude regarding open sources, your attitude towards these webinars or masterclasses. And when we asked you what questions you don't want, and you said, there's none. There's nothing I couldn't answer. I've been doing this for 20 years. I've solved some big challenges. And I think it's somewhat that, isn't it? It's trying to get a sense of the type of challenges that you've solved with the UN, with BMW, with other organizations, and the speed and the swiftness that you've done it. But I'm not the expert in this, and so let me pass on to my good friends here, Mark and Nikki, and hopefully they got some questions for you. If you guys have got any questions, please put it in the chat, the Q&A. Thank you.
Hans, thanks first of all for that. It was very insightful, and in my view, that the whole business model around the flexibility, the cost, and the scalability gives you a very disruptive element in the market, and I'm certainly very excited to see that. Maybe a final question from my side. If you had to name 3 pitfalls when looking at migrating to Postgres, what would those be, and how do you avoid them?
The biggest pitfall is usually what I call internal resistance, right? So you have somebody who has been there for 20 years, administrating, working on database X, right? And then you tell them, hey, my friend, it's 2 years to retirement, time to change, right? The default answer is going to be no. So the key challenge here is more like a social one, than a technical one. And the way we tackle this social thing is that if somebody has been in IT for 40 years, even if he's been working for the worst bureaucrats in history and for the most boring company whatsoever, there is still a little bit of technology enthusiasm left in the guy, right? So there is something deep in this guy that makes him do databases, that makes him get up in the morning. So if you can light the fire just a little bit to show him how cool things are, what he can do, how easy it is, if you're able to light this guy's fire, you got him, right? The second thing is we have seen people struggling with Apex and Oracle Forms and 4GL tools when they're too deep into vendor lock. We recently launched something which helps people to get rid of those tools more easily. So we're working on the replacements for Apex and stuff like that, for automatic conversions and so on. So that's a key thing. And the third thing is usually a little bit of bureaucracy, inside those companies. Those are the big 3 things. For example, we had one client we needed the test system, and it took them half a year to provide it. But that's not the limitation of Postgres. That's not the limitation of commercial vendors at all. That's a bureaucratic thing, right? So some bureaucrat has decided that everything has to stop for whatever bureaucratic reasons. And in this case, it's usually not a technical thing. Technical things can be sorted out by engineers. You know, we can do anything there. But if you're stuck too deep in a mindset, or if you're stuck in inflexibility, things like that. So those are, in my judgment, the big hurdles. So it's usually never a technical thing. Technical things can be sorted out, you know.
And I mean, how true is it that, I mean, I come to believe that a lot of the security breaches, 45%, I was told, was from inside a company.
Yes.
So my sense is that possibly there's a reluctance for people to move across because they're aware of the abilities that this offers to find out these individuals who are abusing the security and cybersecurity. Is that a how would you get over that for an organization? Is that through an audit?
At first, I would say that 45% is, I would even consider that to be a low number. Actually, I mean, it depends how you measure, how you uncover it, but I would even say that 45% of internal fraud is a low number. I think that open source is quite helpful in this area because you have more flexibility on the tooling side, right? You can add in more components to do stuff. It's in general easier to administer, and in terms of security breaches, complexity is your enemy. Right? Whenever there is complexity, there's a way around it. I mean, you see it in taxation. If there's complexity, there's more fraud. It's that simple. So because you can find loopholes and everything. So I would say that security is improved by flexibility. And as far as audits are concerned, I mean, I'm totally on your side. If you don't know what's going on there, I mean, you're screwed.
Can I also jump in? You're talking about the idea of essentially a change management issue where people resist change, especially older people, but even younger people can sometimes be resistant to change unless someone holds their hand through that process and helps them to, and as you pointed out, understand the benefits of that change for them. You know, what's in it for me actually, and very often, you know, people have favored the commercial databases because they want, you know, they want it on their CV saying they've worked with whatever it is, you know, commercial database. And my perception is that's changing, and maybe you can give some perspective. I think possibly Europe leads us in that aspect where open source skills are seen as valuable and in demand.
Yes. I mean, in Europe, the change to open source is in full swing. I mean, I would even say that it's become standard. We've seen large corporations where when there is an open source alternative, the commercial one is forbidden because of lock-in, vendor lock stuff. As far as change is concerned, there are two ways there, two things. You can underchange, which means no change, or you can overchange, that you're using all kinds of crap which just got published yesterday. And I think it's having a helping hand which prevents both things from happening, the overchange and the underchange, to have a reasonable rate of change, which is focused on efficiency, on usefulness, on productivity. I think both is necessary. And I think having a helping hand for both things is important, in my judgment. I hope I have not forgotten any parts of your question.
No problem. I also, once someone's decided they want to, you know, migrate over to Postgres, do you have any recommendations as to the platform on which they should migrate in terms of, let's say, a cloud provider? Do you recommend containerization over putting it onto the bare metal, or, you know, operating? Yeah,
I'm a Unix guy from the bottom of my heart. I mean, with Windows, with Postgres, is not the fun thing to be. Not because it doesn't work, but because of the lack of tooling and stuff. The whole ecosystem is just inferior. As far as where to move, I am following the principle that nothing fits all. Meaning that there is flexibility out there. and let's maintain this flexibility. So I tend to prefer, if you're a big organization, a big bank, I would say that on-prem does have value. If you're just trying something out for 5 hours, I think that cloud does have value. So maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle, and depending what you want to do, right? It makes no sense to have a 50 terabyte static database server cluster in a cloud because it's just expensive. But I believe that it also makes no sense if you want to test something for 2 hours for stability or whatever, to just purchase yourself a server, right? It's easier just to rent it out and be happy. You know? So depending on what we're trying to do, I would follow the assumption that nothing fits all.
Yeah, okay, wow, thank you. And I think we've got some little pearls of wisdom there from you, Hans. The nothing fits all, I'm going to use that, I must tell you. It's I wrote it down.
Yes.
I think we need flexibility, and I think that's it. And I think that what we're seeing, even with UX and customer experience, is that organizations are now looking more how to talk to individuals than ever. And so, you know, making sure we have database systems that can achieve those goals for marketers and organizations is really important.
So, I think it's important to create value for the customer. I mean, when there is no value, every price is too high. Or as some great philosopher stated, in the absence of value, price becomes an issue.
For sure. I've got Carl here.
I forgot the name of the guy, but...
Probably Jobs. Steve. So, Mark, did you have a final question for Hans? Or
perhaps, but let me just, before I go, just also thank Hans as well. It's been great listening to you, and as always. But yeah, just as one final thing, we did mention the cloud. Do you have a preferred cloud provider? If you're going to put Postgres on the cloud, is there, have you got a preference?
I'm totally agnostic. I mean, Amazon is one of our customers, so we did some consulting for the RDS guys. I've absolutely no preference, I have to say. I mean, we've worked with Azure successfully, or Azure. I still don't know how to call it. Does anybody know? Just please enlighten me. Is it Azure? Is it Azure? I don't know. You know what we're talking about. We had people on Amazon, on ScaleGrid, on ScaleFeed, etc. So we had people on all kinds of platforms. I have no preference. I'm a hardcore database guy. I want to talk to the database. I don't care too much about how it's done.
So thanks for that, Mark. And Nikki, do you have any final questions or words?
Maybe just a final question. Just very high level, what are the barriers to entry for individuals, people interested in getting involved with Postgres?
Entry barriers. I would say it's only motivation. Just install it, run it, test it, try to do something. All the information is out there. So there is no excuse for not learning anything. It's not just related to Postgres. There is no excuse for incompetence in my case, in my judgment. I mean, unless you're living, you know, on the North Pole and there's no library and no internet and no nothing. But if you know which technologies are out there, if you know what exists, I mean, nothing stops you from installing and reading. You know what I mean?
Thank you. Makes sense.
So thank you so much, Mark. Thank you so much, Nikki. And Hans, a special thank you. So we'll be seeing you again, I'm sure, in July for the next series in the Masterclass. Up until then, keep safe in Austria.
Yeah, so thank you so nothing stops you from signing up for training, nothing stops you from signing up for just installing Postgres. So thank you for everybody attending, and thank you Ralph for hosting this one. Very much appreciated.
Yes, thank you, Ralph.
Guys.
Cheers from Europe. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Nikki.
Thanks.
Bye.